So Buddhism. Buddhism is very different than Hinduism. Hinduism is a religion not based on a singular person. There's many sacred scriptures in Hinduism. There's many teachers, spiritual teachers in Hinduism. Buddhism is based on one individual. And as we heard in the reading today, Buddha means the awakened one. What we know in our teaching, what we teach, and what the universal principle is that there is one power and one presence. Behind everything, there's this one life, and it is always already enlightened. It is always already awake. It's never confused. It's never in doubt. It's not in this world of form. It includes this world of form, but it's never limited to this world of form. It's transcendent. And so, as Buddha is the awakened one, he is already in alignment with this oneness, with this always already enlightened self, and know that because it's timeless, and there's that element within us that is also always already enlightened. I invite us as we go through these next 2 months exploring Buddhism, and we will have a speaker from Buddhism come speak as well, to be with Buddha the teacher, knowing that he is timeless, that he is spaceless, and to connect. And so we evoke him even now, today, this morning, as we're exploring Buddha as the teacher is here with us. And what is he here to teach us? What is he here to offer us on our spiritual journey? The main thing that Buddha talks about is suffering and its alleviation. So in reading about it, I've been conscious of it more. And so I was watching this TV show. I like this 1.5 hour, it's a sitcom called Mom. Does anyone watch Mom? Am I the only one? A few of you? Well, some few of you will own up to it. So basically, the premise is there's 2 women, a mother and daughter. The daughter is also a mother, but the children don't play as much a role. So it's a mother and daughter, and they're both recovering alcoholics. And they have a group of friends from their AA group. And over the years, they have their little adventures and stories. And one of the back stories for the main character, the protagonist, who I believe his name is Christy, or Chrissy? Chris, I don't know, something like that. The protagonist. She's been going, she works, she's a single mom, she has a job, but she's trying to fulfill her dream, and her dream is to become a lawyer. So for the past 4 years in this sitcom, there's just been this background of her going to school at night, taking the classes that she needs to get into law school. She does an internship with the lawyer. So it's sort of been playing in and out of the thread of the story for the past 4 years. So this past week, I turned on the episode, and she hears back from her law schools, and she had applied to everything from Stanford. She was hoping that her story was sad enough they would let her in, to her backup school, which was sort of a local community law school. And about halfway through the program, we realized that she didn't get accepted to anything. And it was just sort of a surprising turn. And because she had always spoken assuming that she would go, and there was sort of the assuming of the plot line. And she even says at one point, it never occurred to me that I would not get accepted to law school. And her college friends who were much younger than her are saying, oh, everyone gets accepted to this low-level school. All you have to do is need a pulse. And she wasn't even accepted to that one. And she didn't tell people. And I thought about suffering. She has her group of friends, her mom, and this group that they'd gone through everything together, and just the shame that she felt, the embarrassment. And how often when we go through suffering do we feel a little bit embarrassed about it, and rather than reaching out, we hide, we isolate. It's just a TV show, and I just burst out crying because I felt that we talk so much, and especially because I'm a minister in a teaching that is a very positive and optimistic teaching. You can have your dreams, go after your passions, follow your bliss, everything's going to happen, but I can't help but be aware that that doesn't always happen the way people think. I lived in LA for 6 years, surrounded by people who wanted to be famous actors and actresses, and it wasn't happening for them, or they would have a moment where they get a part, and so much excitement, then it wouldn't happen, so I couldn't help but be aware, and they were going through classes and writing treatments and using affirmative prayer and just using all our tools and still weren't fulfilling their dreams. What do we do with that? What do we do with those times when we don't get what our ideal is, when we're following our bliss, but our bliss doesn't show up the way we're planning on it and showing up? They talk about suffering as the gap between the ideal and the actual. So we all have our ideals of where we want our life to be and what's actually showing up, and the suffering is the gap in the middle. So this is where Buddha is all about. Buddha, for those of you who don't know, I'm just going to give a very generalized story. There are many different versions of the story. I read the one in Houston Smith, and that was one version, so I'm not going to get into the details of it. But the story is that he was born in a Hindu family in India, eastern India, what is now Nepal, in a ruling class family. They had lots of money. He was raised as a prince. His father didn't want him to know suffering, so he's only surrounded by young, healthy, vibrant people, all good-looking, strong, vital. That's what he knew. He knew a life of nothing but joy and got everything he desired and was a good person, kind person, because he didn't suffer. He didn't need anything. And then somewhere along in his 20s, he married a beautiful woman, has a son. His life is going along swimmingly, and then he goes outside the walls of his kingdom, and he discovers suffering for the first time. He discovers, in a series of events, he discovers old age, he discovers, which he had never seen before, he discovers illness, and he discovers death. And these devastate him because this had nothing to do with his world, and he didn't know any of this existed. So he doesn't move immediately, but it's gnawing away at him, this suffering. And ultimately, he goes off and he leaves his wife and his son to resolve this problem of suffering. For Buddha, suffering of any kind, or at least of this kind, was unacceptable. So I'm just going to let you know right from the outset what the invitation is for you this week. The invitation is to ask yourself, what is your relationship to suffering? Where does it get to be the point where it's unacceptable in your life that you're willing to say, this is no longer okay? What suffering are you willing to put up with? It's a little cold in here, right? Our ideal would be maybe it's a little warm, it would be warmer, but it's a little cold. That's low-grade suffering, right? How are you just in relationship with just little low-grade suffering, things that are a little inconvenient, a little uncomfortable? And how much more serious does that suffering, at what point does it get so cold in here that you're saying, enough, we're going to go somewhere else? That's an easy example. But we all have it. We have that point where we're willing to deal with it a little bit, we're willing to deal with it a little bit, and then enough. I've had enough. I've got to do something about it. So my invitation this week is you're going through the rest of your day today, because I brought up the cold just because it's present in the moment. I want you to be doing this from this moment forward. When do you notice those moments of discomfort in your relationship with suffering? And then you can be at a place where, right now it could be, for anyone in this room, it could be very intense. You might be going through intense physical challenges, emotional challenges, relationship challenges, financial challenges. I mean, there could be intense suffering. And how are we dealing with that suffering? What is our relationship to how we are being with that suffering? That's what we're going to be exploring. We're going to go into next week what Buddha's response to that was. It's an interesting thing. I didn't think of it. I heard someone mention this about the Parkland students. So Parkland, we know we had the shooting, a couple weeks ago. And this is in Florida, 17 people were killed, and the youth, the children, or not children, the young people of the high school are saying, no more. We have to, the suffering for them, that got to the point of this is unacceptable. Children should be not shot in schools. We have to do something, gun control. They've stepped up. What I didn't know, maybe some of you all knew this, I didn't know that Parkland is an upper middle class school. And someone made the point and said, this is the positive side of privilege. They have a sense of, we have a pretty good life. This is not okay. This is not acceptable. And I thought that was sort of an interesting connection that I hadn't made. That the more good we have in our life, the more intolerable the negative. And I was just thinking about it in terms of Buddha. He had such a great life. Everything was working for him, that he had such a high expectation of what life should be. His ideal was so high because he was actually living it and experiencing it. Youth, beauty, everything he ever wanted, all the money, food, whatever he wanted. Everything was fulfilled. So he had such a high experience of that when he experienced suffering, it was so drastic compared to what he had been suffering or experiencing that it was not okay. Like immediately, this is not okay. This is unacceptable. So sometimes do we accept things because we've gotten numb to them? We just like, oh, this is the way it's always been. Twice it's happened to me where I've been with somebody. One is Julian's godmother is gay, and someone spoke negatively about her. And I have an African-American friend who was treated horribly right in front of my eyes, completely unjustly. And in both cases, my rage far exceeded either of theirs. And I said, why aren't you more angry at this? This is not okay. And they're like, this is normal. It just happens. And I thought, wow. And I couldn't figure out why I was so much more angry than they were, because I had the privilege. I had the expectation of being treated better with more respect. And so my expectation was higher, where there would become an acceptance. Where have we accepted suffering in our life? Where have we accepted that this is okay because Buddha was like, no. Where everyone else was accepting this is just part of life, no. We're going to get a little bit more to that into the Hinduism, the connection. Or I'll just say it now because I'm thinking of it now. In Hinduism, they believe that we have these karmic cycles that go on for thousands of years. We're working out karma, and it takes a lot of lifetimes to work through their karma. So what he saw was a lot of people resigned to the idea that we're going to have a lot of lifetimes, and so there was an acceptance of sort of suffering. He was saying, no, I'm not accepting that. That's not my answer. Buddha was not interested in supernatural stuff. He was not interested in miracles. He said, you'll know my teachers because they're not working miracles, because miracles are still temporary. You can have a miracle and change something, but then it can go back to what it was before. It's a temporary. He said, he was interested in one thing. He was a very practical guy. I'm interested in relieving all people of suffering. As many people who are interested in suffering. That was it. He was not interested in the theology. He didn't want to go on into, if you want to find out, does the body continue after life? Does the soul continue after life? Does the personality continue after life? Is this world eternal? Is it infinite? He won't answer any theological questions. They call it and they say he kept his noble silence. He wasn't interested in theology. That was another criticism he had of Hinduism, like Christianity, like anything that humans get involved in. We like to debate all our fine points. He's like, you can debate all you want. Wake up. That's all I'm here for you to do is wake up. Shunryu Suzuki was the same way as a true Buddhist teacher. He came into the Haight-Ashbury 60s, San Francisco from Japan. All the hippies were so happy to have a real live Zen master come from Japan, and they would come into his Zen center to find out all about Buddhism. He had Alan Watts and Allen Ginsberg coming and talking all about Buddhism, and they'd say, tell us about Buddhism. And he wouldn't answer. He'd say, well, why don't you just come in and meditate? I'll teach you how to meditate. Wake up. The theology didn't interest him. He gave some theology, but you don't have from Shunryu Suzuki these vast volumes of literature, Paramahansa Yoganada's books after books after books. You don't get that from Shunryu Suzuki because that wasn't his focus. His focus is wake up. Meditate. Meditate was the way to wake up. What is your relationship with suffering? Another distinct difference between what Buddha was saying, who he was, and the pattern that had become alive in Hinduism was he differentiated. He said, I'm a teacher, I am not a savior. We heard that in the reading. He wasn't willing to be called a god. I am not a savior. I'm not here to save anybody. My teachers are not here to save you. They are not someone to, in Hinduism, the guru, often you talk about, they take on the karma of their followers, the disciples. The disciples are supposed to surrender their will, their power over to the guru. We have a little bit of that in Christianity with Jesus, surrendering our lives to Jesus. Buddha said, no. Nobody give your power over to me. Do not pray to me. Do not look at to me, a God. That is not my role in your life. I am here as a teacher. I'm here to help you point the way to relieve suffering, but you have to work out your own salvation. Everyone was responsible to work out their own salvation. Nobody can do it for you. As we continue to say in our community, we are the chief executive officers of our own spiritual journey. We're very aligned with Buddha on this point. We are in the authority. We are not here to give our authority to somebody else. And in that self-effort, in that I am responsible for my own awakening, for the relieving of my own suffering. It's a very egalitarian teaching. Buddha was very welcoming of women as well as men, way ahead of his time. 6th century BC, by the way, for those of you who don't know. He didn't care about the caste system because he wasn't seeing people for their human connection, to transcend, to start awakening to our eternal self. He wasn't attached to all the different forms and plays, things that we do in human world. So he included all people from whatever caste system was welcome, if you were individually willing to do the work. That was the commitment. Every individual, no matter who you are, no matter what your background is, if you're willing to do the work, you're welcome here to do the work. That's extraordinary. The key is to really believe that it's possible now. That enlightenment isn't something in the future. It's not thousands of years after multiple lifetimes, that it's possible now. I think that is a huge shift. It's also, I see that difference with Jesus and Hinduism. It's now. You can become free now. You can know heaven on earth now. We can wake up now. And we always have that option. I have a friend, again, we're the CEOs of our own journey. And I remember having this conversation with her because it surprised me. We were both on a spiritual journey together. She was my classmate. And she said, I just assumed anyone on the spiritual journey, giving themselves completely to it, had this desire to be fully awake. And she said, no, that's not my desire. She goes, I'm okay with coming back in future lifetimes. This is what I'm called to do this lifetime. And I really need to fulfill this. Like, she felt it. And I'm okay with that. And I thought, wow, that's taking authority of your spiritual journey. She wasn't apologizing. She said, I'm here to fulfill these different visions that I need to fulfill. If I happen to get enlightenment along the way, that's great, but that's not my main reason for being here. That's really powerful. Know who you are. Is enlightenment why you are here? Do you want it now in this moment? One of the things that makes it more accessible with Buddha as well is he taught the middle way. Again, if you read a lot of these spiritual teachers, they talk a lot about removing the world. In Hinduism, we talked about the stages of life, and after the householder, you're retired, then you can turn away from the things of the world and focus totally on spirituality. Buddha didn't teach that. You didn't have to leave the world. In the midst of your life, you can find enlightenment. He didn't believe in totally giving everything up, nor over lavish. Don't go overboard on anything either. He had that, so his childhood was over on all the money and the wealth and the good looks. And then he gave everything up. He tried that path, the ascetic path, and he said, neither of those work. You're sort of this pendulum swinging back and forth, the middle way, balance and structure. The Dalai Lama said the same thing when people were asking about really wanting to wake up. He said, you're getting too focused on the wanting to wake up that you're avoiding your day-to-day life. Participate in the day-to-day life. Play your role. Continue to do your spiritual practices in the midst of your life. Sure, if you have a vacation and you want to go off and do a long silent meditation retreat, absolutely do that. But don't run away from your life. Because a lot of times what people are looking for enlightenment is they're running away from life. And he said, you're going to find enlightenment in the midst of your life. This is what Buddha was teaching, to find enlightenment in a balanced, structured way, to find enlightenment in the middle of our life. And it could happen now. I think of Eckhart Tolle. How many of you have read The Power of Now? Most of you, a majority. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. If you have read it, it's a good time to read again. The thing about Power of Now, I wonder if you all have this experience, is that as you're reading it, Power of Now, you have the experience of being free, like you have those moments of, I'm awake. Because the Power of Now is about being fully present in the moment. He's teaching the same thing that Buddha was teaching. He doesn't lean on tradition. Buddha wasn't interested in the traditions. These are all things he was fighting against. Often when we grow, we're fighting against something. He was fighting against the traditions of Hinduism that felt limiting to him. strong pressure on rituals, on traditions, all these things you had to do. You don't have to do any of that stuff. Just be present now. Wake up to the presence now. The eternal enlightened Buddha is within you now. Your enlightened, always already self is now. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to do any rituals. You don't have to profess any great theological beliefs. Just practice being present fully with who you are now. Are you aware of the mindfulness meditation? How many of you are aware of mindfulness meditation? Most of you. Not all of you, but you can look. I invite you to look it up. It's being used everywhere now. I'm not sure. I haven't looked up the history of when mindfulness made its way into mainstream. I think my sense is it came with Jon Kabat-Zinn, 80s or 90s, because he started saying, when I say secular, it started moving out of the world of just religion. Mindfulness meditation, let me just say, is sort of the same idea as being now. It's practicing this witnessing meditation, so every one of us can witness ourselves sitting in our chair right now. And so it's becoming more aware of this witness. This witness has been witnessing you since you were a child to now. That witness is ever present. It doesn't change. That's the I am presence, the always already enlightened self. So mindfulness meditation is simply getting in tune with this mind, this presence that's watching you. And you're quieting, so you're watching your thoughts, you're watching your emotions, you're watching your body, you're watching what's happening, but it doesn't change. That's a very brief explanation of mindfulness meditation. So Jon Kabat-Zinn started saying this could really help in the medical field. He worked in a hospital in University of Massachusetts, and so he brought mindfulness meditation into the medical world, and it took off because he said this is helping patients. It's a practical tool. Why did Buddhism start? Because he wanted to get rid of suffering. Mindfulness meditation is a Buddhist practice, Zen meditation. Phil Jackson brought beginner's mind, Zen meditation to his Chicago Bulls basketball team to help them become free. I played the best game of racquetball I've ever played, practicing Zen meditation. People are bringing it into the school systems. Mindfulness meditation is being taught in school systems. Mindfulness meditation is being taken to the prisons. It's beginning to become pervasive in our culture. Because why? Because people are finding freedom from it, and there's no religious context to it. You don't have to profess any religious beliefs. You don't have to go to a temple. You don't have to do any rituals. You don't have to do anything but these spiritual practices which are here to help us relieve suffering, which was Buddha's intention. Isn't that extraordinary? Now it gets a little wobbly. It gets interesting. Someone put on one of their, I don't even know who they are, it's a spiritual organization, and they're saying, what do you think about making mindfulness meditation required in schools? And I thought, well, wait a minute. These are the same people who would just hate if prayer was put in schools because that's religious, but they don't see mindfulness as a religious thing, so they're saying, well, So I don't know what I think about that, but it's an interesting thing anyway. But it just shows how much people don't associate it with spirituality. They associate it with freeing suffering, freeing ourselves of suffering. So what is your relationship with suffering? What has been your techniques up until now to deal with your suffering? And using Buddha's invitation that we are the CEOs of our own journey, we get to decide how well our research is going on ourselves. We are our research. How well have I been doing with suffering in my life? How well am I being with my own suffering? How do I handle it? And then taking it one step further, this week I want you also to notice, how am I with other people's suffering? With people that I love in my family? With people in the community, on the planet? How am I with animals suffering? There's a lot of animals suffering on this planet. How am I with our planet suffering? What is my relationship with suffering in general? Does it bother me? Do I just sort of ignore it? How do I answer it in my head? Do I just sort of slough it off a little bit? Or do I actually approach it? And again, looking at this from the objective side that Buddha, his mind was, is it working? How well am I working with suffering in my own life and with other people's suffering? How effective is the tools that I have up until now working with suffering? I was thinking about how mindfulness is sort of pervading the world. And even Eckhart Tolle with his Power of Now, and I know he's done things with Oprah Winfrey, they've done these classes. I mean, it's just pervading the world slowly. And I think it's kind of like behind the scenes. Because Buddha didn't want a religion, that it's taken a while. Buddhism became a religion. We're going to look at aspects of that part that then became a religion. But the actual techniques of being free have started to really come through our culture. And that intention, that world mission that he felt to alleviate suffering is happening, not through temples, but through the secular world, these techniques of mindfulness meditation. The way I look at it, the reason why I keep going like this, it's like coming in through the back door. I remember I had a teacher say religion often comes through the front door. It tells you, this is what we believe, this is what you need to do, there are the techniques, and da-da-da-da. And he said, and then there's religions that come in through the back door. You don't even know they're there. They're permeating our culture, and we don't even know that a lot of what we're hearing is exactly what Buddha was teaching in his essence. The awakened one, that enlightened self, is always already present. It's timeless and spaceless. It continues to show up and say, we don't need to suffer. We don't need to suffer in the way that we've been suffering. At what point do we start saying it's unacceptable? My suffering and other people's is unacceptable. And how much am I willing to effort to become free of that suffering? I love in the reading today, it said that Buddha was willing, first of all, to me, they say his teaching is infinite compassion. The infinite compassion is, it's extraordinary that he went and gave his entire life to free people from suffering when he himself was not suffering at all. He left a wife and a child and a beautiful life. He was 29 years old, very handsome from all reports, good life, and he left it all to relieve the world of suffering. Not even people in his own family were suffering. They all had a good life too. He just saw people, random strangers who were suffering. And he said, that's not okay. That's why it's infinite compassion. I forgot what this, but I got distracted. So we're just going to be with what is my role in infinite compassion. Often when we talk about, religion coming in through the back door to relieve suffering. Often when we come to Centers for Spiritual Living on a Sunday, our desire is to expand, to wake us up, to be inspired. And I like, Houston Smith was saying, Buddhism is a little bit different, where so many of us start so big, and we open ourselves to that bigness. Buddhism starts with right where we are, in our humanness and our groundedness. And so we're starting this journey not from way out here and how great everything is in the enlightened self and we're perfect, whole, and complete. All of that is absolutely true, and we're going to end in prayer where we acknowledge that truth and that freedom, and that is already available to us in this very moment. We don't have to go anywhere or do anything, and we have to start. I know what I was going to say. Start with where we are, and I love that Buddha acknowledges how hard his own journey was. It's right effort. That we have to put the effort into it. And often the reason why we like saviors is because we kind of feel like we don't have to put the effort as much. They did the work, and we just surrender to them, and we get their blessing. On this path, we have to do the work. We are responsible. We have to do what it takes to relieve our suffering. And that's why we're often willing to deal with low-grade suffering, because we know it's going to take work to get rid of suffering. So it's a little uncomfortable, cold in here, but I'm not going to get up and walk out because it's uncomfortable, right? The little sufferings that we go through during the week, I'm willing to have that much suffering, because we know if we're going to really get serious about our own freedom from suffering, that's going to take right effort. And none of us get to bypass that right effort, the work that it takes. So we're starting with where we are humanly. We're starting not with the ideal. Remember, the suffering is the gap between the ideal and the actual. We're not starting with the ideal. We're starting with the actual. Where am I right now? That's the invitation this week. Where am I right now? Not ideally, but actually. Where am I in relationship to other people and their suffering? So it's not just about your life. It's about everything. Just notice it. I am amazed how much more conscious I was this week of hearing stories. I cried a lot more. It's like when you start opening your heart to what's around you. That's amazing. And how am I with that? How am I being with that? And that's where we're going to start, and then we're going to be totally free of all suffering in 2 months, so we're good. Okay. So let's pray now, and let's evoke what the high ideal and what is actual real. Even in the midst of where we are humanly, as we look at our hearts, let's speak to what we know is real. I'd actually like all the practitioners to just stand and hold this consciousness with me. Who've done so much spiritual work themselves. And how grateful I am to know. And to know that I know that I know. That there is only love. There is only love. That this world was birthed from love. It is sustained in love, and we leave in love. That there's never any time where we are outside of this love. That this love is always already enlightened. It is always free. It is never limited. It is never in bondage. It is never in confusion. It is never in fear. It is always free. It is always whole. It is always love itself. And that each and every one of us in this room, in this planet, in the cosmos, all form, all phenomenal experience is birthed in, through, and as this one life and this one power and this one presence. There's nothing outside of it. It is impossible for us ever to be outside of this one power. It is impossible for us ever to be outside of our always already enlightened self. It is impossible to be anything other than pure love. We simply forget. And so we are on the journey of remembering and awakening to who we always already are. In this moment, we have that memory. We are awake. We've let go of the illusion of separation. We have let go of the illusion of separation. We let go of the illusion of separation. There is no separation in this room. There's only one. There's only one on this planet, as these cosmos, all the galaxies and billions of stars, every atom and cell and every grain of sand, one. There is only one. We do not make it happen. It is impossible for us ever to add on to this one. It is impossible for us ever to take away from this one. There is only one. All these religions are emanations and expressions of the one. All these beautiful and amazing spiritual teachers as guides, there's only one. There is only one. No walls, no separation, one. We are living, moving, and having our being in, through, and as this one life, this one power, and this one presence. We feel it in every area of our life. We bless our bodies. If we are having physical challenges, behind those physical challenges is this eternal oneness, this eternal love, this eternal wholeness that is never can be touched, hurt, harmed, or endangered ever by whatever physical challenges we may be going through, whatever emotional challenges we may be going through, relationship challenges, challenges within our own heart and our own life, whatever is happening, that oneness, that life is never hurt, harmed, or endangered. We are whole. Each and every one of us are whole in our love, in our emotional life, in our relationships, behind the stories, behind the temporary time and space, circumstances and conditions is this eternal wholeness, this eternal love, this eternal oneness, and we are it now. Mentally, behind all of our millions of monkey thoughts is a peaceful awareness, pure, crystal clear awareness. I am. I am. And we recognize that all of our mental machinations get resolved in the awareness of I am. How grateful I am for the power and the presence of pure spirit alive and awake as each and every one of us here and now. How grateful I am for the pure Buddha shining its light as every one of us in this room. This Buddhic awakened consciousness is alive and activated in each and every one of us. Our hearts, our bodies, our minds are wide enough and big enough to hold this entire world in our arms of compassion, our infinite care, our infinite love. We are the Buddha, infinitely compassionate, and infinitely awake. How grateful I am. This is the reality beyond time and space as each of us right now, right now, right now. In deep and abiding gratitude, I give thanks for this truth that is spoken and collectively felt and known, and we release it into the law of life, knowing that as it is spoken, it is done, and I invite us all to say together as one, and so it is. Amen.